Now bear in mind that this is the angel speaking to Daniel. And the angel says, and now I will tell you the truth. Now that doesn't mean that the angels are liars, and now they're telling the truth. But we read those words again, don't we? And now I tell you the truth. And the angel has to preface what he's about to tell Daniel with those words. And like we talked about last week, it's like me saying to you, listen, I know this sounds absolutely crazy. I barely can believe it myself, but it is the truth. It is true what's going to happen. And he does this because this is such an amazing passage of Scripture, such amazing prophecy contained here, that critics have criticized the book of Daniel, saying that this had to be written after the fact, because no one could have predicted that this would happen beforehand. So the critics of Daniel say this had to happen after the fact, that Daniel was basically a historian, that he wasn't writing prophecy, that this wasn't prophecy he was recording. Now, it's history. For us now, in hindsight, we look back, it's history. As Daniel was receiving this vision, it was prophecy. Now, if you are bored to tears by history, there are at least 100 boxes of Kleenex under the chairs here. Why, I never understood, but there's 100 boxes of Kleenex. Grab a box, because you will be crying profusely by the time we finish this message this morning. It is loaded, laden with history. And what the angel's telling Daniel isn't history at that point. He's telling them, he's giving Daniel a prophetic vision. He's saying this will happen. It hasn't yet happened yet, but it will happen in the future. Daniel's not writing about this after the fact. He's hearing about it firsthand from the angel. It is yet to happen. Listen, Jesus calls Daniel a prophet in Matthew 24, and that is good enough for me. He is not a historian. He is a prophet. Now, as we look at this chapter this morning, and we're going to read how incredibly accurate it is. I'm going to do my best to try and point the accuracy out, how incredible this prophecy truly is. But we're going to see it from God's prophetic viewpoint. And God's prophetic viewpoint is from Israel. Everything God does is centered on Israel, and it just branches out from there. And it always intrigues me that it's not history, it's his story. This is God's story as he tells it. And from the point that God tells it, from his viewpoint, it starts in Israel and branches out from there. Israel is the place where civilization began, and Israel is the place where the world as we know it will end one day. Little tiny Israel, little postage stamp-sized Israel, is in the center of one of the most volatile places on the planet. They are truly in the epicenter of the future. They're truly the epicenter of future prophecy and prophetic events. And the angel is now going to begin to set the stage for things that are about to happen, things that will happen in the future. Now, bear in mind as we go through this that the prophecies given in Daniel, the prophecy that the angel gives him here, the viewpoint that he gives him here is anywhere from 50 to 100 to 200 years out into the future. So it truly is a prophetic vision. And we're going to read about what the angel says will happen, and then I'm going to tell you how history recorded those actual real-life events as they happened. Now, historians had to have taken the Bible and read it and just began to take what truly happened, what they saw happen in history, and match it up to the Bible, and it was a perfect match. Behold, verse 2, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So what the angel's telling Daniel is that 3 more kings will arise. Currently, Cyrus II, or Cyrus the Great, is ruling. So there will be 3 more kings from him. Cyrus's claim to fame, of course, is that he got into an impregnable fortress. He entered into Babylon. He conquered Babylon without a fight. He went in somewhere where no one else could get into. He managed to get in, and he managed to conquer Babylon without a fight. So he's ruling and reigning. After him will arise his son Cambyses II from 529 BC to 522 BC. And during his reign, Egypt now becomes a province of Persia. After him, a guy by the name of Pseudo-Smyrtus. He must have hated his mother for that name. Didn't last long. He only lasted about a year, so he's not even worth mentioning here. But he is the next king in succession. After him is Darius I Histippus. And he ruled from 522 BC to 486 BC, and under him, Persia flourished. Now, he embarked on a campaign against Greece, but was defeated in 490 BC in the Battle of Marathon. He dies in 486 BC. So those are the three kings that had arisen after Cyrus. And the angel tells Daniel now there will be a fourth king who's far richer than the others. And by his strength, he would stir up the nation of Persia against Greece. And we see that in history as King Xerxes. This truly happened. King Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus, is what they called him in Hebrew, is the same king that marries Esther in the book of Esther. So King Xerxes is the next king. He is the fourth ruler. And he spends the next 4 years saving his money and gathering all the troops in Persia. He literally stirred up his entire empire. He just built a battle plan. He had a vision. He was going to grab every guy he could. He was going to build the biggest army he could with the most finances he could gather, and he was going to go against the Greeks, which he did. Xerxes raised an enormous army, went against the Greeks, and we know that he fought the Greeks in the Battle of Thermopylae. He went against the Spartans. It's a famous story. There's been movies, books written about it. After a fierce battle with the Spartans, he finally overtakes them. He goes on to torch Athens, and he takes over a good portion of Greece. But his army doesn't have victory. His army is beaten in a naval battle known as Salamis, the Battle of Salamis. They're also beaten in a land battle in the Battle of Palatia. So his army is defeated by the Greeks. Now, this battle actually weakens the Persian army, but it causes the Greeks to gain strength and gain a hatred of the Persians. Now, you can read all about this. If this isn't enough history for you this morning, you can read about this in Ezra, in Nehemiah, in Esther 1 and 2. It's supported by accounts in Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, one of my favorite books. It's a Jersey writer, Malachi, the Malachi Papers. And in there, he makes an offer you can't refuse, that you cannot outgive God. So you can read about those in the Persian dynasty in those books. Daniel realizes now that the nation that would succeed Babylon is, in fact, Persia. It's the chest and arms of silver that Nebuchadnezzar saw in the statue. But what he could never know, what he couldn't know at that time, were the future rulers that would come afterwards. And an angel now tells him that there will be another king, not a Persian king, but a Greek king. Then a mighty king shall arise, verse 3, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion for which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. Now, Alexander the Great is who we're talking about here, and he was one of the most feared rulers, one of the most feared generals of all times. As a matter of fact, when people heard he was coming into their area, they just flung open the gates of their city and let him come in because they knew they could not defeat him in battle. By the time he had turned 32 years old, he had conquered the known world, and his dominion was much greater than that of the Persians even. Now, he had arisen and reached a point, the pinnacle of his success, but he wouldn't enjoy that success very long because at the age of 32, in June, as a matter of fact, of 323 BC, he dies in Babylon. And history tells us that he suffered with a fever for 10 days from which he never recovered. So Alexander the Great dies, and on his deathbed he was asked, "Who do you want your kingdom to go to?" And Alexander said, "Give it to the strongest," which meant it was divided up between his four generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Now the angel said that his kingdom would be broken up to the four winds of heaven, and truly it was. It was broken from the north to the south, to the east, and to the west, the four winds of heaven. Lysimachus received Asia Minor, which is in the east. Ptolemy received Egypt, was in the south. Seleucus received Syria in the north, and Cassander received Greece, which was in the west. So the kingdom of Alexander was truly broken up to the four winds. Now it's divided between his four generals, not his posterity, not his heirs. As a matter of fact, Cassander was a long-term friend, and believe me, if you think you've had trouble with friendships before, I don't think you've had a friend like this guy. He ordered the execution of Alexander's wife, Roxana, the child that they had between them, and his mother, Olympus, so that he could consolidate his power as he took over Greece and became the king of Macedonia. Nor were these kingdoms split up according to the dominion that Alexander held, because the kingdom divided among 4 generals was much weaker now than the kingdom under one rule. So it was divided into 4, made it weaker. Now, I'm not keeping count here, but by some estimates, this vision the angel's giving Daniel here contains from 100 to 130 prophecies fulfilled. Each one of these verses is laden in prophecy, some 2 or 3 or 4 prophecies in one verse. I remember taking the book of Daniel in Bible college, and I remember this history lesson. And I remember sitting there bored to tears. And I'm like, come on, get through this. Who cares? Just get through it. Come on, what happens in the end? Just go to the end. And I just didn't see, I couldn't appreciate the true prophetic content of this chapter. And I hope that you see it for what it is and not just see all the history in it. This vision so far has focused on a broader view of the nations, but now it dwindles down to 2. The focus starts getting a little bit more narrow. Now we go from all 4 of these nations down to 2, and what we're going to focus on from this point forward is the north and the south. And then finally, the vision breaks down towards the end to one man, and we'll look at him this morning as well, and that's Antiochus Epiphanes. So right now we're going to focus on these 2 kingdoms. Verse 5, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So from verse 5 to verse 35 this morning, Daniel's going to tell us now of the kings of the north, which is Syria, and they come from the line of Seleucus. Remember, Seleucus was one of Alexander's 4 generals. Then he's going to tell us about the kings of the south, which is Egypt, and that line comes from Ptolemy, again, another one of the generals of Alexander. And this prophecy that we're going to read about now in the north and the south kingdom extends out over 150 years and leads up to Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, the reason this is important from God's economy is that because Israel sits right between these 2 nations, the north and the south. And whatever conflicts arise in these 2 nations affect little Israel because they're marching right back and forth between them to get to each other. So it affects them. Now, the king of the south, the angel tells Daniel, become strong. And who we have here is Ptolemy I Soter. And the one that shall gain power over him, dominion over him, is Seleucus I Nicator. Now, Seleucus forms an alliance with Ptolemy. And it was that alliance between these 2 that made him more powerful and allowed him to take over much or all of Syria. And you see, because Seleucus had fled from a gentleman by the name of Antigonus of Babylon. And when he formed this alliance with Ptolemy, he was able to defeat Antigonus, and he was able to control now most of Asia Minor. And for a time being, for this particular period, he becomes much stronger, much more dominant than Ptolemy of Egypt. And at the end of some years, they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and from him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So several years have passed now. There's an uneasy peace in the kingdoms. And to kind of keep the peace, we see a new development. Development occur between these 2 rivals. Now, it wasn't uncommon in those days for the king, the rival king of another king, to give him a daughter in marriage to keep peace between the 2 kingdoms. And that's exactly what we see here. But it also wasn't uncommon for that daughter to fall in love with the rival king and then become a spy for that king in her father's own kingdom. And we're going to see that also as we go through this story today. So this king gives the other king, the king of the south, marries off his daughter to the king of the north. And history tells us that the king of the south, who's by now is Ptolemy II Philadelphus, gives his daughter Berenice to Antiochus II Theos. Antiochus, who was married at the time, divorces his wife to take his new wife, divorces his wife Laodice, even I'm getting confused there, divorces his wife Laodice to marry this king's daughter Berenice. And All of this happens in an effort to strengthen the ties between these two nations. But as prophecy tells us, neither of these two kingdoms flourished after that. For a few years after the union, he who begot her, her father, Ptolemy Philadelphus, dies. After a few years after this union occurred, he dies. Now all bets are off. All bets are off because Antiochus Theos decides he's going to get rid of Laodicea, and he's going to get rid of Berenice, rather, and take his wife back, Laodicea. So, listen, you need a scorecard to keep up with this, I understand. But apparently, Laodicea was not happy with this whole situation. She wasn't happy that she got the boot in the first place, and we know that health has no fury like a woman scorned. So she murders her husband and his ex-wife, Berenice, by poisoning them. So, even Jerry Springer would be jealous over this story. Verse 7, but from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. And the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So, from the branch of her and roots, from her family, Bernice's brother now is in control, and that's Ptolemy III Euergetes. And he is filled with fury and rage over the death of his sister, and he decides he's going to get revenge. So his revenge comes when he goes against the king of the north, now Seleucus Callinicus. I told you need a scorecard to keep up with these guys. And he defeats them. And he carries off their gold and their silver, just as the prophecy said that he would. And he carries off their gods. Now, I think you probably have to rethink who your gods are when they can just be picked up and carried off. We serve a God who carries us, doesn't he? We serve a God who lifts us up, who hears our cries, who keeps our tears, the Bible tells us, in a bottle. He's not a burden that someone else can just pick up and carry away. He rather lifts our burdens from us. And you may be here this morning, you may be with us this morning, and you may know who God is, you may know of God, but you may not truly know who God is. You may not know that God is much bigger than your problems. And I think we tend to put God in a box, don't we? We tend to look at God and say, I couldn't do this, or my friend couldn't do this, so you can't do it either, God. We put him in a box. And we need to look at God for who he is. He is awesome. He is far above us, far above anything we can think. He does for us what we could beyond what we could think or imagine. He is so much bigger than all of this. He is the God of creation. Think about that. The universe exists today because he spoke it into existence. That's the God we serve. He is so much bigger than any problem we have. So we need to take him out of that box and then let him be God in our life. Let him truly be God in our life. And he will continue more years than the king of the north. Now, he reigned a relatively long time after this. And there was peace for a short time. Again, an uneasy peace, but there was peace between the kings of the north and the kings of the south for a few years, until the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but he shall return to his own land. So Seleucus Callinicus, we know, in an attempt to take back the territories that he had lost in battle, attacks Egypt in 240 BC. He was defeated, and he returned home embarrassed and humiliated. He returned back home, not able to do what he had set out to do. On his way home, he falls off his horse and dies, further adding to his embarrassment. I mean, it's one thing to get killed in battle. That's honorable. But to just be riding along, mind your own business, and fall off your horse and die, that's embarrassing. Verse 10, however, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So his sons now were the ones that stirred up strife. He was succeeded, we know in history, by Seleucus III Soter, who was assassinated 4 years later. Then his brother, Antiochus III, or the Great, took his place and ruled from 223 BC to 187 BC. And he was able to mount many campaigns against Egypt and he restored the lost territories that had been lost in battle. As a matter of fact, he restored them all the way to Gaza, which, as we're going to see, made the king of the south very nervous. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him. And the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will be cast down tens of thousands, but will not prevail. So the enemy, being this close to Egypt, is a concern for the king of the south. Now, this king, Ptolemy Philopator, amassed a large army of over 70,000 men to attack Antiochus III. Antiochus III had an army of over 70,000 men. So they met and they did battle at a place called Raphia near the Palestinian border. And so these two multitudes of armies face each other on the battlefield, and the king of the north was given into the hands of the enemy, the king of the south. Antiochus lost his entire army and barely escaped capture himself. Although the king of the south, Ptolemy, didn't take advantage of this situation. He didn't pursue the king of the north. He didn't go back into Syria and totally destroy him. He let him go. So he didn't have success. He didn't gain complete and total victory over this. And there's another piece. I mean, if you can't beat them, you got to kind of join them, right? So peace, once again, is in the land until Antiochus turns his attention east with much success. He gains wealth and strength during his conquest, so much so that he took another run at the Egyptian army. So Antiochus manages to build his army back up again, manages to turn his direction in another area. He figures he can't beat the king of the south, so I want to go east now, and he has success in doing that. He manages to build his army as he goes along, and he manages to rob the wealth of the places that he's conquering, so his army becomes much stronger and his wealth becomes much stronger to support him. So look at verse 13. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. Now listen, I know you didn't come here this morning for a history lesson, but if you look up these facts that we're talking about this morning, these facts that I'm relaying to you, you will discover that every one of these things happened in history. This is truly an amazing prophetic vision that the angel is giving Daniel. And we get a glimpse of the future history of this world, and we're going to get a glimpse of our future history as we go through this vision into chapter 12. And please bear in mind, this isn't history to Daniel at the time he's receiving this vision, is it? These things have yet to happen. This is a prophetic vision that he's receiving. And yet, even though it's history now, as we look back on it in hindsight, there's still prophecy here for us, because there's still details here that we're going to see as we go on that have yet to happen. And listen, if the prophecy that's contained here in such detail came true in such precise detail, then we can be sure that the prophecy that we have that is yet to come will happen exactly as the Lord said it will happen. In 201 BC, Antiochus joined forces with Philip V Macedon, and he went against Ptolemy V Epiphanes and won a great battle over the Egyptians. Now, along with his army that he raised up, the angel says there will be violent men of your people. They'll exalt themselves in fulfillment of this vision, but they will fall. And what he's talking about, was referring to, is there were Jewish mercenaries that rose up at this time, and they tried to overtake Egypt at the time. They were bolstered. They had a little help along the way by Antiochus's victories, and they thought they'd use this opportunity. They'd take advantage of it to overthrow Egypt and even just become stronger in Israel, but that revolt was put down. So Antiochus now stands in the Holy Land all by himself, victorious, and Syria now becomes under his control from the Holy Land as far south as Gaza. And he shall set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, in verse 17, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of a woman to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him, or be for him. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and will take many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against him to an end, and with the reproach removed he shall turn back on him. And then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So Antiochus, in an effort of finding a diplomatic end to these hostilities, marries off his daughter now, Cleopatra. And it's not the Cleopatra that you think it is. He marries off his daughter Cleopatra to the 7-year-old king of the south, Ptolemy V, Epiphanes, in 192 BC. Now you may be saying to yourself right now, "Aw, isn't that nice?" He gave him such a lovely wedding gift. He gives him his full-grown daughter to a 7-year-old king. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. There was a sinister plot behind that. He gave him his daughter in marriage in hopes that his daughter would disrupt the kingdom from the inside out. That she would cause such destruction. Listen, ladies, I don't know if you're aware of it, but some women have that ability to come in and just disrupt things. And that's what he was hoping for. I think we have a few of them here this morning with us. But she doesn't stand with him. She sides with her 7-year-old husband against her father. Not happy with the fact that his daughter now sides with her 7-year-old husband, and feeling like, listen, I just can't win. I can't win for losing. I mean, this is my own flesh and blood, and she turns against me. He now turns his face toward the coastlands to Greece and decides to attack Greece. But once again, he can't win for losing. He is defeated in 2 battles, the Battle of Thermopylae, and he's defeated again in the Battle of Magnesia, where, of course, milk of magnesia comes from. I'm not sure of that. You'll have to look that one up. The ruler here that brings forth reproach is the German, listen to me, I was watching World War II last night, is the Roman general Lucius Scipio. They call him Skippy for short. Now, I'm not sure, I would anyway, but he led the Greek and Roman forces against Antiochus. Now, Antiochus and Lucius had met once before, and Antiochus insulted the Roman general, and we know that you do not insult the Roman general and get away with it. So they had the last laugh when they defeat him in battle. Antiochus dies in 187 BC, and he's succeeded by his son Seleucus IV Philopator. Now there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So this king was not popular right from the very beginning, because he imposed taxes on the people. Now, we would never elect a politician that said he was going to raise taxes, would we? They just wait till they get in office after we elect them, and then they raise taxes. But he really had no choice in the matter, because the Roman government has become so powerful, so strong, that they imposed taxes on everyone. He had to raise the taxes on the people to be able to pay this tribute tax to the Roman government. Now, we know from history, the history that's recorded in the book of Maccabees, that the tax collector for the territory was a gentleman by the name of Helidorus. Now, Seleucus Philopator dies suddenly. Nobody dies suddenly back then. You either have an arrow sticking out of your chest, or you just ate something that was poisoned. Scholars believe that it was Helidorus who actually poisoned Seleucus Philopator, not out of anger, but out of greed, and thus fulfilling the prophecy that he would die. He would be destroyed not in anger, not in battle. He was poisoned out of greed. And his death gives rise to a very vile king in the north known as Antiochus Epiphanes. So the vision again changes here. It changes from the kings of the north to the kings of the south, and we start to narrow it down to one man. This Antiochus Epiphanes, and why he's so important, is because he has become a type of Antichrist for us. Jesus says of him, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, he's referring to this very thing that we're going to look at here this morning. Now, the abomination of the temple happens when the Antichrist in the future walks into the temple, the newly rebuilt temple, or newly utilized temple from however they set this up, and he goes in and he desecrates the new temple. He desecrates the Holy of Holies. And this has happened before, and Jesus is giving us a preview of this. He's saying, go back in history. Look, because it's happened before. It happened with Antiochus Epiphanes. And what I want you to see from all of this history that we're learning here this morning is how every single detail fell into place to bring this person to the forefront. And that's going to happen again. As a matter of fact, it's happening around us already. Events in history that are occurring right now as we speak are happening. So all of those things are falling into place for the culmination of one event, of one person coming to the forefront, and that is Christ Jesus as he comes back to rule and reign. Everything that's happening here in these prophecies, happens with that focus in mind. All of this is moving us closer and closer and closer to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ to this earth. And in his place, verse 21, shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So Antiochus IV takes the place of Seleucus Philopator, and he adds the title. Now you notice a lot of these kings have a title after their name. He adds the title Epiphanes, which means the glorious one. So this is what he thinks of himself. He is the glorious one. The Jews had a nickname for him. They called him Epimanes, which means madman, and he truly was a madman. Now he doesn't come to the throne in honor. He doesn't come to the throne in succession, meaning he's not the legitimate successor of this throne. He comes in peaceably. He didn't wage war to take over the throne. He seized it by intrigue. Now, here's where you're going to need a scorecard, so try and follow along with me if you could. There were many heirs to this throne, but the most notable and most probable heirs were Demetrius, his nephew, son of Seleucus the Fourth. Demetrius at this time is being held in a Roman prison, so that kind of cancels him out. Then there was Seleucus, Seleucus' infant son, whose name was also Antiochus, to just make it more confusing. He was in Athens, but he was a little baby, an infant. So the vile Antiochus, who we'll refer to him as from this point on, just so you don't get confused, poses as the infant's guardian and says, look, I have this little baby, and I'm going to take care of him, and I'm going to sit on a throne, and I'm going to keep it warm for him until he's old enough to take over. Well, not surprisingly, the infant Antiochus is murdered. Anybody see that coming? By a man named Andronicus, who then Antiochus, the vile Antiochus, had him murdered to get rid of all the witnesses. You need to take a break? Because I'm having trouble keeping up with this, and I have notes in front of me. All right, you good? With the force of a flood, verse 22, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. So the force of the flood describes the campaigns which he led against Egypt and other territories, including the troops that Helidorus, the poisoner that we learned about a few verses back, apparently he gathered up some troops, and Antiochus defeated him as well. And he learned that Egypt was planning to attack him now, so he invades Egypt in 170 BC. He wins a victory, which is now called Rosbaron, but he doesn't take over all of Egypt. And the prince of the covenant that refers to being killed refers to the high priest that year, Onias III, whom Antiochus had put to death. He's called the prince of the covenant because he was the head priest of the temple, and he was responsible for making sure people observed the law. And then after the league is made, verse 23, with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a smaller number of people. So Antiochus is a very deceitful man. He's the kind of guy that could pat you on the back with one hand and reach around and take your wallet out of your pants with the other hand. He's not a good guy to have around, so he shrewdly develops a league or a pact with other nations, even the nation of Egypt. Now there's a struggle going on here, a power struggle between Ptolemy Philometor and Ptolemy Eurgeti for the control of Egypt. Antiochus supports Ptolemy Philometor because it not only helps the Ptolemy, it helps Antiochus become stronger militarily. And that's why he enters into these pacts and joins these leagues to begin with, because it benefits him. It makes him stronger militarily. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So as the old saying goes, no army moves, or armies move rather on their stomachs, but armies also move on finances. It can't move at all without money. It may move on its stomach, but it cannot move at all unless it's financed. And that's what he does here. He's always looking to expand his territory, always looking to become more powerful. So he took the wealth and the riches from the richest areas that he had already conquered, and he used that money not as his fathers had used it. His fathers had used it for personal advantage, but he is a little smarter than that. He uses it to buy favor from other nations, from other leaders, to obtain their cooperation for future battles. So he takes those riches and he disperses them among those leaders. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a great and mighty army, and he shall not stand. For they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of the king's delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And this is a reference to the intrigue and the dishonesty that's going on behind the scenes. He's sitting down, Antiochus is sitting down with the allies of the king of the south, and he's wining and dining them, and he's luring them over to his side. He's paying them off. He's giving them money. So the king of the south thinks he has all these allies around him. In reality, they're all double agents. They're all playing for the other side. So Antiochus rises up an army and attacks Egypt. And the king of the south, who thinks he has all the support around him, finds out that those who he thought were his friends were actually against him. So Antiochus even though he defeats them, he fails once again to take all of Egypt. So once again, he negotiates another peace treaty. He negotiates a peace treaty he has absolutely no intention of keeping as he negotiates. And the more I think about this guy, he could truly hold office today, couldn't he? Both of these kings, verse 27, hearts shall be bent on evil, and they should speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so shall do damage and return to his own land. So you have to understand that these two kings are battling for wealth and territory. They just happen to be rivals. And so far, neither one of them has managed to have an overwhelming victory over the other. Neither one of them have managed to take over the whole territory for themselves. So along the way, they decide to have negotiations. And they decide they're going to outsmart each other at the negotiation table. So they sit down and try to work out a plan that they both can live with, so they both can exist in the same area. But their hearts are so filled with evil that all they can think about as they're sitting there at the negotiation table across from each other is, how can I cheat him out of his land? How can I cheat this guy out of his land? How can I discover the weaknesses in his kingdom so I can use them and exploit them and overtake him? They're sitting there smiling at each other, and at the same time they're devising evil in their hearts toward each other. And it sounds so much like a congressional hearing. All right, I'm done with the politics now. Anyway, as Antiochus returns home with the spoils from his victory in Egypt, his heart now turns to the destruction of Jerusalem. At the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsook the holy covenant, and forces shall be mustered against him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. So Antiochus once again turns towards Egypt, not content with what he's already taken away, not content with the spoils of war. He wants more, or he smells blood in the water. I mean, at this point, he's attacked so many times, maybe he sees a weakening there, he smells blood in the water, and he returns to Egypt in his mind to finish him off. But he won't find victory there as he'd found before. He captured Ptolemy Philometor, but he was forced to retreat from Egypt because he failed to conquer Alexandria. Not one for giving up easy. You can never accuse him of being a quitter. He once again turns against Egypt in 168 BC. This time, however, he's met with a much different foe. A Roman consul named Gaius Popilius Lianus demanded that Antiochus leave Egypt immediately or face the wrath of the Roman army. So And the Roman army, by the way, is represented by the ships of Cyprus. That's what it's referring to. Antiochus says, I want to consult with my leaders first. Let me go, let me consult my leaders, and I'll give you an answer. So the Roman consul, Gaius, takes his stick and he draws a circle around Antiochus. And he says, you can consult with your leaders, but I want an answer before you step out of that circle. So Antiochus, not wanting to go to war with the Romans, he concedes Egypt to Rome. Embarrassed and humiliated for what happened, like a bully that doesn't get his own way, he turns his anger now on a city that doesn't have the same power Rome has. He turns his anger toward Jerusalem. He makes deals along the way with Jewish traders who help him get into Jerusalem and take it over. He makes deals with them. They forsake the Holy Covenant, and they help Antiochus do what he's about to do. Now, the history of this time period that we're going to look at now can be found in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. That's an apocryphal book. It's not included in your Bible, but it is an excellent source of history for this time period. He enters into the temple. He enters into the Holy of Holies. He desecrates it by sacrificing a pig on the altar and sprinkling the blood all around. He stops the daily sacrifices just as the angel said he would. He orders the Jews to stop worshiping, and he places an idol, an image of his god Zeus, in the Holy of Holies. He was absolutely merciless. Women who tried to obey the law by having their sons circumcised were marched through the streets with their infant sons and cast over the walls of the city. Anyone discovered observing the Sabbath was burned alive. He had absolutely no respect for the Jewish people or their customs or traditions. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives during this time period. The Antichrist, he is a type of Antichrist. The Antichrist will also desecrate the temple after that temple is rebuilt. That will start the second half of the 3.5 tribulation. The Great Tribulation will begin at that time. He will also persecute the Jewish people. And when this takes place, Jesus says, flee for the mountains. Because the time so hideous is going to occur that unless the days were shortened, no flesh would survive. Antiochus becomes for us a type of Antichrist, and we see through him, we get a little glimpse, a little taste of truly what the Antichrist will be like. Those, in verse 32, who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. And when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. You notice the angel says here 3 times the appointed time. It gives you an idea that who's in control. God's in control. He's appointed the time. He's set up the time. These things will happen, but they'll only happen within that appointed time. They won't go past that. It's only for a time. It's only for a season. And in the end, God will have his way. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes perpetrated great wickedness against the Jewish people. He was a maniac. He truly was a madman. He tried as hard as he could to convert other Jews, the Jews, to his beliefs, to his worship, to actually worship him as their God. But God's people remained strong. The Maccabees rose up and fought against Antiochus Epiphanes. They finally had enough. They saw their customs being destroyed. They saw their people being murdered. They saw this madman take over the Holy of Holies and desecrate it, and they had enough, and they rose up and they fought against them. And during that battle, they had enough oil in their lamp for one day. But through a miracle of God, it lasted 8 days until the end of the battle. The Jewish people still celebrate that miracle today. It's called the Festival of Lights, or you may know it better as Hanukkah. What Daniel witnessed here in this vision is that an evil person would arise up at an appointed time, according to God's schedule, and ruthlessly persecute the Jewish people. Many of his people would perish during that time. Many would suffer greatly at the hands of Antiochus Epiphanes. Some would fall from their faith and actually join forces with the enemy. And others would stand strong in the Lord and stand firm on his word. And they would rise up in opposition. to this evil. And it's a picture of what's to come, isn't it? A picture that once again the Jewish people will go through this exact same thing. And they're going to go through it at the hands of one even more vile, even more evil than Antiochus Epiphanes. One even more ruthless, one filled with even more hatred towards the Jewish people and the followers of Christ. And that person will be the Antichrist. And that leads us to our study next week. So please read ahead. But before I close in prayer, I want to just jump ahead to chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. You see, in the end, Antiochus Epiphanes lost, didn't he? He lost. At one point, we learned from history that he was on his way back from somewhere, and he fell to the ground and just burst open, filled with worms. The worms had been eating him. He died. God's people prevailed in the end. They prevailed because they had God on their side. The heavenly host of heaven were on their side. And the heavenly host of heaven fight for us. We looked at that last week in Daniel chapter 10. They stand up for us. Satan has only a short time to do what he is going to do. He has a short time appointed to him. But in the end, he too will lose, and God's people will once again prevail. See, we know how this all ends, doesn't it? We can look ahead and read the end of the book, and it ends in our victory. Matter of fact, we have victory right now, don't we? We have victory in Christ. We have already won the battle. We already have victory. So it's time, brothers and sisters, to start living that victorious Christian life. God gives us history here, but more than that, he gives us his story. He warns us. He gives us history. He gives us prophecy to warn us and to prepare us for what is to come. Now, we know that in the end times, many will fall away from their faith. And we see that happening already. It's called the Great Apostasy. We know that many will actually join forces with the enemy, and we see that happening all around us as well. And we know that others will stand strong in the Lord and stand firm on his word, and they will rise up in opposition to the evil times that we live in. So the question that becomes for us sitting here this morning is, what group do you want to be in? Without question, the group that stands strong for the Lord and stands firm on his word will be the most difficult group to count yourselves as a member of. It will be the group that faces the toughest battles. They will endure the most attacks, and they will face the greatest persecution. And you need to know this. You need to be forewarned. You need to be prepared, because you need the purpose in your heart now. That you will stand for the Lord no matter what. That you will stand firm on his word no matter what. That in the end, we will stand up for Jesus. And nothing will deter us from taking that stand. Amen? Please stand.